Today I'm fixing this eyesore in our backyard, and I'm going to be using reclaimed lumber so I can save some money.
My neighbor tore down his old fence recently, and I was Johnny on the spot, and I took the sections right off his trash pile.
We just have a lot of junk, and frankly, it looks horrible. So what we want to do is enclose it, and I hate the look of lattice, so I want to do something different. I'm going to try to use those planks and get something that looks a little more modern and a little more sleek.
We flipped the fence section over, and I decided to use a circular saw to cut the top and bottom rails off first. The bottom of the pickets were all rotted out from being in contact with the ground, so I wasn't really losing any good wood there anyway. Now, the middle section looked pretty darn good, and I just needed to get the boards off without busting them up. I tried a pry bar at first, but it was just ripping the boards off and leaving the nails. So then I had a big hole in the board and nails to pull out on top of it. And these ring shank nails are no joke, so it was time for another pivot.
Right, so using the pry bar, it works, but man, it's taking a long time. Plus, I'll have to pry them out of this 2x4 if I want to reuse that later. So instead, I'm going to switch over to the recip saw, and I've got a metal blade on here, and I'm just going to whip down and cut all of the nails, have them fall off. Then I can punch the nail heads out later, and I'll have boards. I think it's going to be a lot faster.
Well, a lot faster was an understatement. This metal blade sliced right through the nails, and my one-handed recip saw was perfect for this job. I was mowing through these things with some speed and feeling a lot better about my salvage job at this point. I could also use the same technique on those top and bottom rails to remove the small bits of pickets, and then I would have some usable 2x4s. One down and 11 more to go. I just went full Zen mode, and I was sawing the ends off and then removing the pickets from each of the center rails. I did run into some larger nails, those ones that secured the rails to the posts. Now, any of these I just pull out with a hammer, or better yet, a cat's paw. Now, this thing is a beast at pulling out nails, though I don't think it looks anything like a cat's paw. I think snake's tongue would be a way cooler and more appropriate name. Now, one thing that you'll quickly find is that the yield on salvaged lumber is hit or miss. Now, some of these 2x4 rails look like they took the fast boat to Banana Town. So I had a scrap pile going of all the unusable stuff, and it was just chunking things over there. And after going through this process a dozen times, I gotta say I got pretty darn good at it. I realized I could rip off the ends and then strip those down quickly with the recip saw. And instead of standing up the fence, I just sawed the boards off on the ground as well. I got it down to just about 8 minutes to disassemble an entire section, and it yielded 15 pickets and 3 2x4s. Not bad.
So I got everything disassembled now. It took a few hours, and I definitely got faster at the end, as you could see. But I have, I don't know, well over 100 of these planks here, and I have some of the 2x4s. And I'll decide tomorrow if I want to sand them first or wait till after I do the assembly. A little bit of a late start today, but the birds are chirping and we're ready to work. I'm going to start by boxing in this area here. So we're going to have some of these that are going to have actual gates and swing open, and some that will be fixed, and this will be a fixed one. So I'm going to build the frame first because the boards are a little bit out, and then I'll adjust it to get it fit, and then we'll do the cladding afterwards.
I took the measurements for the first opening, and then I went to the wood pile to see which 2x4s I could use. I had a few different lengths of boards here, so I picked ones that would get the most out of each piece for my cuts. I set up my small cordless miter saw in the backyard to make this job easier. But you've got to be real careful with these salvage boards. They've got the cut-off nails from the pickets in them, and most still had nails in the ends. Always check both sides before you cut, and remove any nails that won't let that board sit flat before you can do the cut. I used my hammer here, but that snake's tongue would have been way better. I cut all the 2x4s to length, and since they are simple rectangular frames, I used the first board to mark the next one to keep them the same size. I'm also keeping it simple here with the construction, and I'm going to be using pocket holes. But I did upsize it, and I used the Kreg HD insert instead of the regular one. I also used my old K4 jig, so I would let it take the brunt of these nail-riddled boards. I did keep a close eye on where the nails were in the wood so that I didn't blow out my drill bit on one. So you'll probably notice quite a few of these holes are off center because I was trying to avoid the metal. Now look, these 2x4s are just straight nasty. I drilled the pocket holes on that mangled side that I cut the nails on so that I could use that other flat face against the work table and at least have a fighting chance at these frames being straight. I secured everything together with Kreg HD screws, and I added in a center support on that large frame to attach the pickets later. Now with this first frame done, I went over and fit it in the opening. I'll probably need to fine tune it a little bit since my 6x6 posts are twisted and out of plumb. Go figure. Now, after that, I repeated the process and made one more large frame in 3 sets of smaller frames that'll be for swinging doors to access under the deck at different spots. And with all the frames done, I started laying out the pickets to see how many I'd need to cover each one. Now, unfortunately, these boards were too short to cover all the way across the large frame, so I'll have to cut the pickets to half the size and do 2 runs of them. Now, to speed up the cutting process, I ganged together several boards at once here. And because I'm a sucker for symmetry and a recovering engineer, I marked the cuts so that the nail holes would fall in the middle of that final piece. Now, it would have been nice to avoid the nail holes altogether, but I just couldn't make it work with the length of these boards. And it'll just be part of the charm of a reclaimed wood project. And so I had 2 large frames and 7 small ones that I had to clad, and that meant a ton of pickets that I needed to use. So I went through the pile and I was cutting down parts for all the frames to different sizes to match each one. And after I had a few good stacks, I wanted to try out my new toy that I picked up. Now, punching out the nails by hand would have been as fun as shopping for straight 2x4s, and it would also take forever. So I picked up this pneumatic air locker to punch them out. It has this little rod that fires out of the end and punches the nail when you pull the trigger. It's basically like a scaled down version of that dude's weapon from No Country for Old Men.
Call it. For what? Just call it.
So instead of air locker, I'm calling it the Death Puncher. I mean, seriously, I need to have a talk with these marketing people. Now, the Death Puncher worked like a charm, and I was firing those nails out of there left and right. And after all that, this was the right time to sand the boards. Now, this was a huge undertaking, so just sit back and relax while I do all the work. Now, next up, I ripped the 5 1/4 slats down into 2-inch and 3-inch strips. It'll add some dimension and character to the slats versus all being the same size. And I'll get the most yield out of the boards this way too. But this project quickly started eating up my shop, as 100+ slats just became 200+, slightly smaller slats. And now I could finally start putting these frames together and see how they look. I started off with 2 of the small panels. I set the strips flush on one side, which is where the doors will meet when they're closed, and then that left an overhang on the outside that I could trim to fit. Now, for the spacing in between the boards, I used scraps, which are just about a 1/2 inch thick. Now, this looks pretty good. It's going to give plenty of airflow to keep any mold from happening under the deck. Now, the final strip was a bit too wide, so I cut that down on the table saw before attaching it. I'm using my 15 gauge trim nailer with galvanized nails to attach all these strips. I think I bought this thing like 20 years ago. It's a little tank. This thing's totally made out of metal. They just don't make them like this anymore. Seriously, the company shut down, I think. The process took a while, but it was so satisfying seeing the frames coming together. Installation of these bad boys was a bit tricky. The posts were all kinds of jacked up with twists and bends like I mentioned, so I got the measurements the best that I could and I transferred them to the frames. Now, track saw works wonders here, as you can just put it right on the layout line and quickly get your cut. And I was being pretty cautious to not cut more than I should, so after a test fit, I did have to do some fine tuning to get it just right. Now, for the larger stationary panels, I cut down 2x2s for mounting cleats. I mounted them to the deck posts so that the finished surface of the panels would be set back 1.5 inches, and this is going to allow for the hinges that I'm going to use on the other doors. Then I could secure the frames to the 2x2 cleats with 2.5-inch screws in the gaps between the slats. And man, this sucker was looking good. I am so glad that I saved this wood from the dump, as the hard work was really starting to pay off. Now the other full frame went in nicely on the other side, and nicely means after a few adjustments. Then I could move on to the swinging doors in the middle. I wasn't quite sure how I was going to make these hinges line up on these warp beams, but then I had a stroke of genius, or at least like a dot of inspiration. I cut another piece of 2x2 that was the same height as the doors, and then I mounted the hinges flush with the top and the bottom, and I used the holes that would go into the panels when it's fully assembled. So now I could take them back to the post and line them up with the layout marks that I just made. Now, after attaching the top hinge, I just needed to position the bottom hinge so that the 2x2 was straight up and down. And this actually worked out really well. I used the same system throughout the rest of the install. And to make sure the doors were perfectly aligned, I clamped the two sections together before installing them. And then Susan and I brought them over as one piece, and we could shim them into place to get everything level. Now this again worked surprisingly well, and sometimes overthinking things does come in handy, I guess. After I got the hinges all secured to the doors, I gave them a little test run. Maybe I'll start doing musicals under here. I finished off the side of the deck with the same technique, except the left bay only had one swinging door. Now with all the doors installed, I needed to deal with that tricky little bit under the stairs. Now instead of going with a full 2x4 frame, I had extra 2x2s left over from the cleat material, and so I went ahead and used those. After getting a few measurements, I cut the vertical and horizontal parts to fit, and then I put pocket holes on the ends to hold them together. I took them back over to the stairs, and I marked the slope on those horizontal boards, and it was a lot easier than using my protractor, much to its disappointment. I used the bar of my clamp to offset the line an inch inward, and then I made a mark for the cut. I had to grab my handsaw here because this was more than the miter saw could cut at such a harsh angle. But let's just say I'm not an ace at the handsaw, and starting it on this edge was a little hard. But after I got it going, it worked fine. Then I could cut the long section of the triangle to size and just attach it with a few screws to complete the frame. I installed the slats on this piece the same way as I did before, but this time I used a large carpenter square to set the slats straight. The overhanging ends here are going to be cut flush with the track saw later.
So unfortunately, I do not have the parts to finish the rest of that triangle, and we are losing light really fast. And I have to get a coat of finish on this right now because it's going to rain a couple days so I can catch up to it. So I'm going to come back to that and just go ahead and start staining right now.
We prepped the doors by masking off the hinges with some painter's tape to keep the stain off of that silver plating. We also put down some plastic sheeting to protect the grass and the rocks. I'm spraying the finish here because brushing it on would be a complete disaster and take forever. So what I'm using is the Flexio 5000 from Wagner. This is the same sprayer that I used on the deck before. I'm using the detailed sprayer head, which has a smaller cup, but it's going to let me get more control into the nooks and between the slats. I'm going with an exterior semi-transparent stain here that was also the same one from the deck. Now before spraying, you should fine-tune the spray pattern, and the Flexio makes it really easy because it has little adjustments for airflow and material flow right on the gun. And now the fun part, the spraying. Now seeing this stain go on really tied everything together, and it went on really fast. Now I'll have a link in the description to the Flexio 5000, and I would highly recommend a sprayer like this for a project of this size. Before hitting the second coat, I finished up the triangular piece and I installed it there under the stairs. Now the setback was perfect, so I could just attach it right to the stringer for the stairs and the vertical post. I also decided to put a stop on the front of the swinging doors so that the look was consistent across all the panels. After I got those in place, I could stain those two parts and then move on and do a second coat for everything else. That second coat really darkened things up nicely.
The color match turned out great, and just this whole area looks amazing. I am so happy with what we've done. Was it a lot of work? Absolutely, but it was worth it.
This has also got a lot of extra storage, and it is a really nice addition to the deck.
If you want to see how I refinish the deck or any other outdoor projects, I got a playlist queued up for you right there. You can go check that one out. I want to give a big, huge thank you to all those folks that have been joining the Builders Club. More information down below, and I'll catch you guys over there on the next video.